Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Hope. That was the word that flashed into the mind of the long-faced young man as soon as he heard Bai Xiaochun's words. But then he glanced at the mountains of meat sitting there behind him, grinning maliciously, and he hesitated. You. Bai Xiaochun stepped forward with an utterly charming smile, looking like the type of person who wouldn't harm a fly. He clasped the long-faced servant on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations on becoming an outer sect disciple, elder brother. You are the fish that leapt over the dragon gate. You will soar like a shooting star, your future limitless. However, your junior brother here worked really hard to run all the way to the finish line. Don't you think it would be appropriate to give a little compensation?" The servant's face darkened. If he didn't understand by now what was going on, then he didn't deserve to have lived for so many years. He looked at Bai Xiaochun, and then at Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He. Then his expression flickered as he rapidly considered the matter, trying to decide if it was worth it. It didn't take very long before the long-faced young man gritted his teeth and made his decision. If he lost this chance, it might seem like all he was losing was a month of time. However, who knew what other sort of powerful expert would appear during that month? Besides, who was to say whether or not the three people from the ovens might not show up again in the next trial by fire? Most important of all was that this young man was dead set on becoming an outer sect disciple, and now, hope had been set down right in front of him. Finally, he stamped his foot. "How much compensation do you want?" he asked through gritted teeth. Beaming, Bai Xiaochun quickly replied, "Not much, not much. Look, I prepared for several months to participate in this trial by fire. How about we agree to 20 spirit stones? That should be enough." When he heard the number mentioned, the long-faced young man's heart trembled. He flicked his sleeve, and was just about to refuse, when Bai Xiaochun once again spoke up. "Look, it's not that I'm being greedy. All three of us are together, you see, so you can't just think about me. My eldest brother and third elder brother both starved themselves and lost a lot of weight for the sake of this trial by fire." In that respect, Bai Xiaochun wasn't lying at all. Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He had both lost quite a bit of fat on their way up the mountain. The long-faced servant eyed Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He, and inwardly began to let loose a torrent of curse words. Then, he started to bargain, and ended up agreeing on 16 spirit stones. Heart twinging in pain, he finally tossed a bag over to Bai Xiaochun. "All right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Wonderful," replied Bai Xiaochun cheerily. "Okay, elder brother, please wait off to the side for a moment. Once we have 2 more takers, we'll open the way to the exit gate." Bai Xiaochun tossed the spirit stones to Big Fatty Zhang. When the long-faced servant realized that they were going to wait for 2 more people to come, anticipation suddenly welled up in his heart. It was a situation of, if I get screwed, you better not have a smile on your face. By this point, the 2 outer sect disciples on the other side of the exit gate realized what was going on, and their eyes were wide with disbelief. What are you people doing?" one of them shouted. "You're actually selling spots in the outer sect? What gall?" Big Fatty Zhang was elatedly counting the spirit stones when he heard the outer sect disciples. Looking irritated, he turned to glare at them. "What are you hollering for? It was tiring reaching this point, and now I don't feel like going any further. Don't tell me we're not allowed to let other fellow disciples continue on past us? If they want to give us some compensation for our efforts, what's so wrong with that, huh?" The 2 outer sect disciples weren't really sure how to respond to such a statement. It was at this point that 7 or 8 flushed faces could be seen hurrying up the path. The sound of their gasping pants rang out almost like thunder. In the lead position was a burly man of about 30 years of age. He was bare-chested, and looked very impressive as he strode up to the top of the mountain. Bai Xiaochun immediately stepped forward, eyes gleaming. "You're a bit late, elder brother. However, I suddenly don't want to become an outer sect disciple. Would you like my spot?" The burly man stared in shock, then turned back to look at all the other servants coming up the mountain behind him. Then he snorted coldly and said, "You think you can extort money from me, you little brat? Beat it." Roaring, the man waved his arm, causing the spirit pressure of the 3rd level of qi condensation to surge out. Bai Xiaochun backed up a pace and shouted, "Eldest brother." Almost immediately, a mountain of flesh descended from above. The burly man's face fell as he looked up. Then, a huge boom rang out as the mountain of flesh smashed into him. The burly man let out a miserable shriek as Big Fatty Zhang proceeded to sit down on top of him. Although he struggled, it was impossible for him to free himself. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he was so big and strong to begin with, the air would have been squeezed out of his lungs, and he would have fainted. When the 7 or so servants coming up the mountain behind the burly man saw what was happening, their eyes went wide with shock. The 2 outer sect disciples also gasped. The burly man stuck under Big Fatty Zhang almost seemed to be deflating, and they couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for him. Eyes darting about, Bai Xiaochun leaned over and whispered, "Eldest brother, we have an audience." Having known Bai Xiaochun for over a year now, Big Fatty Zhang understood exactly what he meant. Glaring down at the burly man, he clenched his massive hands into hammer-like fists and then began to beat him soundly. "How dare you try to freeload off of Lord Fatty? What brazen gall! It was really hard to climb all the way up here. We wanted to become outer sect disciples, but just happened to give up at the last minute. Of course we want some compensation." "Fudge, I can't believe you refused us." After beating him for a bit, Big Fatty Zhang then jumped back up into the air and then slammed down onto the man. The burly man was shrieking miserably, and could barely breathe. Then Big Fatty Zhang prepared to jump up again, and the man suddenly held a bag out in a shaking hand. Face filled with terror, he blurted, "Here, take some compensation." Big Fatty Zhang immediately helped the burly man to his feet. Face beaming, he took the bag, glanced inside, then helped the man dust off his clothes. "Ha ha ha, why didn't you say so earlier, bro? Look, people are already lining up ahead of you. All we need is one more and we'll open the path." The burly man looked both humiliated and enraged, but didn't dare to say anything. He stalked over to stand next to the long-faced servant, feeling incredibly depressed. As for the long-faced servant, he already felt a little better, and couldn't help but feel that he was smarter than this burly fellow. "That was incredible, eldest brother," Bai Xiaochun said, grinning from ear to ear. Then he looked over excitedly at the other servants who had been following the burly man, but were now standing there looking terrified. Big Fatty Zhang smiled proudly, then walked back to his place by the entrance, where he sat down again to block the way. The 2 outer sect disciples exchanged dismayed glances. Compared to what had just happened now, the way Bai Xiaochun and the others had extorted the long-faced servant almost seemed mild and gentle. They're actually robbing people. This is robbery." They were infuriated, but also a little bit jealous, and couldn't help but wish they had come up with a similar idea back when they had been participating in the trial by fire. Most conflicted of all were the 7 servants who had been following close behind the burly man. As they watched Big Fatty Zhang crushing and beating the burly man, their eyes began to shine with a bright light. Previously, becoming an outer sect disciple had almost seemed like an impossibility. But now, they all of a sudden had hope. Looking around excitedly at all the people, Bai Xiaochun suddenly cried out in a high-pitched voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's one spot left. How about this, we'll give it to the highest bidder." Immediately, the crowd of people realized what was happening, and the sound of their panting grew even louder. The looks in their eyes became even stranger, and their hearts filled with all sorts of wild possibilities. Almost immediately, people began crying out bids, making it seem almost like an auction. "I'll bid 10 spirit stones." 11. "That spot belongs to me. I'll bid 15 spirit stones." Bai Xiaochun, Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He were instantly elated. When the 2 outer sect disciples heard what was going on, it was like pouring oil onto fire. From their perspective, extortion was one thing, and robbery could potentially be overlooked. But to see the situation turning into an auction left their minds spinning. It was so outrageous that waves of shock seemed to batter their hearts. To them, the most villainous among the 3 wasn't Big Fatty Zhang, but rather, the seemingly charming and innocent Bai Xiaochun. Outrageous. Shameless. One of them finally gritted his teeth and spun around, eyes bloodshot with either jealousy or fury, he wasn't sure which, as he went to report the matter to the honor guard. Bai Xiaochun wasn't actually very pleased with the level of bids being called out. His eyes turned up in thought for a moment, and then he cried out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to hurry things up. Otherwise, other servants are going to show up, and then who knows what lengths they'll go to in order to win." In response to his words, the voice of a young woman suddenly called out from further back down the mountain. "I, Hou Xiaomei, bid 30 spirit stones." I come from one of the cultivator clans and have tons of money. Let's see who dares to try to steal my spot. A pretty young girl huffed and puffed her way up the mountain. She had white skin and a slim frame, and looked quite young. When Big Fatty Zhang saw the pretty young girl, his eyes went wide. He was just about to say something, but stopped himself and looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Almost as soon as Hou Xiaomei's words left her mouth, the rest of the servants were thrown into a huge commotion, calling out increasingly high bids. In the end, she named a price that left the horse-faced youth and the burly man trembling in fear. In fact, they even felt like they had just gotten a huge deal. Hou Xiaomei strode out from the crowd, her ample chest leading the way. She looked back scornfully at everyone else, then joined the long-faced young man and the burly fellow, who called himself Lord Wolf. Together, they walked up to the final step and then exited the trial by fire. Behind them, Bai Xiaochun, Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He clasped hands and bowed deeply. Congratulations, fellow Taoists. You are the fish who leapt over the dragon gate, you are galloping divine steeds. The long-faced servant and the others stood there at the top of the mountain, somewhat in a daze. Although they were now outer sect disciples, for some reason, it wasn't as joyous of an occasion as they had imagined. Then they heard the words uttered by Bai Xiaochun and the others, and the long-faced young man and the burly servant exchanged rueful, bitter glances. Hou Xiaomei, on the other hand, seemed extremely excited. Her charming face was even a bit flushed. I never thought that I, Hou Xiaomei, would ever encounter such luck, she thought proudly. And thus, the trial by fire concluded. As Hou Xiaomei walked further up the mountain, Big Fatty Zhang looked at her and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Ah, so fair, so young, so pure, he said. Then he looked over at Bai Xiaochun, as if he were comparing the two of them. 1. Bai Xiaochun was also staring at Hou Xiaomei as she walked off into the distance, his heart filled with conflicting emotions. Then he heard Big Fatty Zhang, and turned to find him looking at him out of the corner of his eye. Hey, what are you looking at? He yelled. Big Fatty Zhang laughed loudly at Bai Xiaochun's anger, then pulled out the bag of spirit stones and quickly changed the topic. Come, why don't we count our spirit stones? We're rich now, ha ha ha, this really was a great idea. What's the point in counting them? Replied Bai Xiaochun with a cold harumph. No matter how many times you do it, it won't change how many there are. Ninth junior brother, you don't understand. What you're looking at is just spirit stones, but what you're counting is life. Big Fatty Zhang rarely spoke of the profundities of life. To hear him speak in such a way left Bai Xiaochun shocked. He took the bag and tried to count the spirit stones the way Big Fatty Zhang would, but quickly got bored and handed the bag back. It was at about this time that glittering light rose up along the trial by fire path. Everyone's vision swam, and when it became clear again, they were back at the bottom of the mountain. When the middle-aged honor guard who was in charge of the trial by fire saw Bai Xiaochun and the others, a strange expression appeared on his face. After a moment, he shook his head and ignored them. As far as he was concerned, the sect would have to figure out what to do with the ovens. Bai Xiaochun and the others were nervous, but seeing that there were no immediate repercussions, they exchanged glances, cleared their throats, and quickly headed back to the ovens. Big Fatty Zhang kept counting the spirit stones over and over again, all the way until they were back at the ovens. The other fatties soon returned, also elated. Everyone exchanged glances, and then looked extremely proud of themselves. After the loot had been split up, Bai Xiaochun went back to his hut. He had come to this place seeking to live forever. Were it not for the fact that he needed the medicinal plants to exchange for an age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill, he would never have even thought for a moment about spirit stones. That night, nobody in the ovens could sleep. Big Fatty Zhang and the others were simply too excited from getting rich all of a sudden. In the past, their coin purses had been depressingly empty, but now, the future seemed bright and glorious. That having been said, they were still worried about the possible repercussions of what they had done, making it difficult for them to fall asleep. As for Bai Xiaochun, he couldn't stop thinking about the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill, and was equally unable to fall asleep. The next day, the news about the ovens blocking the path during the trial by fire spread like wildfire through the entire servants' district on the south bank of the Spirit Stream sect. Soon, everybody had heard. Did you hear what the ovens crew did? Are they crazy? I can't believe they did that. Heavens, they sold spots into the outer sect. Outrageous. How come I never thought to do that? I've heard that the people from the ovens have important backgrounds and are really well connected in the sect. Otherwise, how could they dare to do something so infuriating? All departments and individuals in the servants' district were talking about the ovens. In the following days, the crew tried to keep a low profile and even avoided going out alone. One evening several days later, Bai Xiaochun was ladling soup out into one thick-bottomed bowl after another. Suddenly, he heard the sounds of footsteps coming from the path outside. Everyone from the ovens, get out here immediately. The supervisor's department has received orders to investigate your role in what happened during the trials by fire. Even as the voice called out, the main gate of the ovens was kicked in loudly. The sound of the door being kicked open echoed out as several servants burst in, all of them wearing the robes of the supervisor's department. Leading them all was none other than the burly man who had come last time with Xu Baosai. Big Fatty Zhang and Bai Xiaochun exchanged a glance, then walked out nonchalantly to face the combative group from the supervisor's department. I thought I heard the crows squawking this morning, Big Fatty Zhang said. I should have known that you would be showing up today, Chen Fei. Chen Fei laughed coldly as he looked first at Big Fatty Zhang and then at Bai Xiaochun. Their completely calm demeanor caused him to frown. On the way, he had been extremely excited, having believed himself to have finally gained the advantage he needed to be able to take down the ovens, to put an end to the animosity that had existed for years between their two departments. Quit pretending to be so calm, Chen Fei said with a cold, eerie laugh. His eyes flickered with a fierce light. People of the ovens, allow me to ask, did the 9 of you attend the most recent trial by fire for servant promotion to the outer sect? Sure did, Big Fatty Zhang replied, chuckling. That's all I need to know. Take them away. Chen Fei didn't mince his words. He waved his right index finger, and immediately, a dozen or so servants from the supervisor's department quickly hurried forward with iron manacles to arrest the ovens staff. Seeing this, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but laugh and say, is your supervisor's department in charge of everything? You can even disqualify us from being able to become outer sect disciples? You guys are pretty powerful. Chen Fei couldn't help but think of the recent incident with the flying sword. He held his hand out to stop the other servants, then looked at Bai Xiaochun with narrowed eyes. Junior brother Bai, if you're still not convinced of my authority, then answer me another question. Did you ovens people block the exit of the trial by fire and then sell spots in the outer sect? Do you dare to admit that you did such a thing? Of course I admit it, Bai Xiaochun replied with a calm nod, looking quite charming. He even pointed at Big Fatty Zhang and the others and said, so do they. That's right, we all do. So what? Big Fatty Zhang said with a hearty laugh. Chen Fei's face flickered. He had never imagined that the ovens staff would actually admit to the allegations. He had expected them to give in only after a bitter and protracted battle of wits. The way things were playing out seemed strange, and an odd feeling was growing inside of him. Therefore, it was without another word that he growled, excellent. Since you admit it, then it saves me having to ask more questions. You're going to come with me to the Hall of Justice. If any of you dare to resist us, then in accord with the sect rules, you'll be immediately expelled. With that, he flew forward toward Bai Xiaochun, followed by the rest of his group. However, it was at this point that Bai Xiaochun suddenly extended his right hand and performed an incantation gesture. Immediately, a beam of sword light shot out from his sleeve, transforming into a colorful wooden sword. The instant the sword appeared between the two groups, it let off an oppressively cold glow. Chen Fei stopped in his tracks, his face falling. Bai Xiaochun, how dare you resist arrest? Elder brother Chen, the supervisor's department might have the right to question us, but where did you get the right to arrest us? HMPH, what you admitted to violates sect rules, of course I have the right to arrest you. Wait, what sect rule did we violate? Bai Xiaochun asked with narrowed eyes. Big Fatty Zhang and the others also looked at Chen Fei with narrowed eyes and cold smiles. You sold a spot into the outer sect, which violates sect rule number. Wait, huh? Suddenly, Chen Fei stopped speaking, and his face fell. Beads of sweat popped out on his forehead. It was only at this point that he suddenly realized that there was actually no sect rule specifically forbidding people from selling spots into the outer sect while on the path of the trial by fire. After all, not many people would think to do such a thing, and even if they did, they would likely not have the gumption to go through with the plan. Elder brother Chen, why are you sweating? Bai Xiaochun asked, sounding flabbergasted. However, as he spoke, his words grew louder and louder. Come on, what rule was it that we violated? Just say it. Wait, could it be that we didn't violate any sect rules? Elder brother Chen, did you trick the Hall of Justice into carrying out your own personal vendetta? Is that why you came here to punish us? Elder brother Chen, what you are doing is a violation of Volume 9 Statute Number 11 of the sect rules. That comes with a heavy punishment. By the end of his speech, he felt great. Liar. It wasn't just Chen Fei's face who fell. All of the other servants from the supervisor's department all realized that a huge mistake had been made. It was at this point that Big Fatty Zhang smiled viciously, lifted up both hands, and cracked his knuckles. Fierce gleams appeared in the eyes of the other fatties as they began to walk toward the group from the supervisor's department. Chen Fei, the Hall of Justice will deal with your violation of sect rules, said Big Fatty Zhang with a vicious grin, his energy surging. But right now, you had better explain how you're going to compensate for the oven's cherished main gate, which was painstakingly forged by the hands of numerous past ancestors who died in the process. Since they had dared to block the finish line of the trial by fire, they had naturally done so after being fully prepared. Bai Xiaochun had suggested early on that they research the sect rules before enacting their huge plan. Charge! Cried Big Fatty Zhang. His mountain-like figure immediately caused Chen Fei and the others to begin to tremble. Instantly, the clashing and clanging sounds of battle rang out in the courtyard. As for Bai Xiaochun, his body flashed through the air as he alighted on his usual spot atop the bamboo fence which surrounded the courtyard. He flicked his sleeve and clasped his hands behind his back. Looking off into the distance, he looked every bit the lonely hero who didn't deign to participate in the fighting. With the snap of a finger, Bai Xiaochun, reduced the supervisor's department to ash. 1. In describing Hou Xiaomei, Big Fatty Zhang uses the same characters that make up Bai Xiaochun's name. The supervisor's department and the ovens had been at odds for years. There was a lot of friction between the two, but usually things were kept under control. The worst that ever happened were minor injuries. The battle over the trial by fire went on for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. Big Fatty Zhang and the others beat Chen Fei and the supervisor's department squad until they were black and blue. Only when they forked over enough spirit stones to pay for the main gate were they allowed to leave, cursing the entire time. Before departing, Chen Fei looked over at Bai Xiaochun standing there on the bamboo fence, and the hatred in his heart grew deeper. As far as he was concerned, ever since Bai Xiaochun showed up, the ovens had only become more and more repulsive. The fight had attracted quite a bit of attention in the servants' district. Many of the servants, upon realizing that the supervisor's department could do nothing to the ovens, were angrier than ever. However, other servants were like Hou Xiaomei, and felt that what the ovens had done meant that they would now have a good opportunity in the trials by fire. In fact, when the trials by fire started the following month, the ovens crew proudly made their way to the starting line. The surrounding servants looked at them furiously. Big Fatty Zhang cleared his throat, looked around at the other servants, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you get to the top more quickly than us, then you won't have to buy a spot. We're doing this for the good of the sect. A good struggle will bring out the best of the best." He had been instructed by Bai Xiaochun to word things in such a way, and the result was that the surrounding servants clenched their jaws in anger. When the bells began to toll, and the trial by fire began, the ovens crew, as well as all the other servants, began to race up the mountain as if their lives depended on it. Soon, the fatties and Bai Xiaochun were so far ahead they couldn't even be seen. The other servants smiled bitterly, but continued on with the race. Apparently, they had taken Big Fatty Zhang's words to heart. Yet again, the ovens crew succeeded in spectacular fashion, which caused a huge commotion in the servants' district. After all, they had profound cultivation bases, and their physical frames were enormous. No one dared to say anything. The ovens was now more in the spotlight than they had ever been. Although they were well known in the servants' district, their current fame surpassed anything from past years. Another 2 months passed, and whenever there were trials by fire, the ovens crew quickly hurried over. As far as they were concerned, that time of the month was their spirit stone payday. Bai Xiaochun was also excited by the build-up of spirit stones. He would soon have enough to buy all of the medicinal plants he needed. Eventually, yet another round of trials by fire began. It was currently dawn. Big Fatty Zhang, Third Fatty He, and all the other fatties woke up early. Bai Xiaochun joined them, and the 9 of them sped along, then split into 3 groups, with the group led by Big Fatty Zhang heading toward Fragrant Cloud Peak. However, a group from the supervisor's department intercepted them en route. No explanations were given, and fighting broke out immediately. The supervisor's department held the advantage in terms of numbers, leading to a chaotic battle. Soon, the toll of bells could be heard, causing Big Fatty Zhang to grow so anxious that his eyes were shot with blood. As soon as the sound of the bells could be heard, the group from the supervisor's department scattered. Big Fatty Zhang, Bai Xiaochun and Third Fatty Hei were incensed, but had no time to give chase. They immediately sped toward the trial by fire on Fragrant Cloud Peak. When they arrived at the entrance of the path, nobody was there, so they instantly began to race up the mountain. "Those supervisor's department bastards," cursed Big Fatty Zhang. "Just wait until we're done here, I'll call all the junior brothers together and we'll go beat the crap out of him." He was pushing so hard that the fat in his body was burning away, making him visibly thinner. However, the result was explosive speed. Bai Xiaochun was also furious. He only needed a few more spirit stones to reach his goal. Gritting his teeth, he pushed forward with all the speed he could muster. Keeping pace with Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty Hei, he shot up the path, passing one servant after another. As soon as they reached the top of the mountain, their faces darkened. Standing there at the peak, blocking the entrance, were 3 people. Standing up front was Chen Fei, flanked by 2 burly men who appeared to be at the 3rd level of qi condensation. As soon as they saw Bai Xiaochun and the others, they started laughing uproariously. "Big Fatty Zhang and Bai Xiaochun are here. Well, don't worry, we still have spots left. You want one?" Big Fatty Zhang gritted his teeth. Eyes bloodshot, he yelled, "Despicable. Shameless. You flunkies. Hey, since this isn't breaking sect rules, then if you people from the ovens can come here, then so can the supervisor's department. Ha ha ha, this business belongs to the supervisor's department now." When Bai Xiaochun and the others heard the mocking laughter of Chen Fei and his friends, their rage burned. Now it was obvious why the others from the supervisor's department had ambushed them on the way here. It was all a big plot. Big Fatty Zhang let out a bellow of rage and was just about to attack Chen Fei. As far as he was concerned, a fight at this point was unavoidable. Furthermore, he had no way of knowing how often the same thing would happen again in the future. It was essentially the same as stealing spirit stones from him, which caused his fury to bubble and boil. Third Fatty Hei was equally enraged. However, in the same moment that the 2 of them were about to attack, Bai Xiaochun looked up in thought and then suddenly whispered, "Eldest brother, run as fast as you can and then push them over the finish line. We might not get any spirit stones this time, but at least the supervisor's department won't be able to steal our business in the future." Big Fatty Zhang's eyes immediately went wild with joy. More than ever, he realized how much of a villain Bai Xiaochun was. Laughing heartily, he suddenly shot forward. Third Fatty Hei followed Big Fatty Zhang, chuckling, eyes shining. The path wasn't very wide, and when Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty Hei charged forward together, they were almost like a huge wall. A wind kicked up as they sped directly toward Chen Fei and the others. Bai Xiaochun followed behind Big Fatty Zhang, letting out a wild whoop. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Fei and his friends attacked. However, it did no good. Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty Hei were charging forward like startled wild boars. Their dual attack was shocking enough to make ghosts and gods weep. They charged madly forward, slamming into Chen Fei and his friends, forcing them back. Chen Fei and his friends were completely shocked, and when they realized what the Ovens crew was doing, their scalps felt like they were about to explode. In any other situation, Chen Fei and his friends would dodge to the side or counterattack. But here, fleeing backward would do no good, and would in fact hasten their defeat. As they were pushed back, their faces filled with fury. Obviously, they had no desire to become outer sect disciples. After being promoted, they would no longer be in the supervisor's department, and would become ordinary disciples again, losing access to their ill-gotten gains. "Elder brother Zhang, stop it," blurted Chen Fei, sweat pouring down his forehead. "There's something I want to say," however, before he could finish, he was interrupted by Bai Xiaochun. "Eldest brother, keep going. Push them over the finish line." In response, Big Fatty Zhang let out a roar and pushed forward even harder. Third Fatty Hei joined him, and rumbling sounds echoed out as they shoved Chen Fei and 2 other burly fellows down the narrow path. The first to cross the finish line was one of the burly men, who then stood there at the top of the mountain, wanting to cry, but unable to. The other burly fellow let out a miserable scream. Staggering backward, he began to beat his chest in regret. Last to cross over was Chen Fei. No matter how he struggled, the path was too narrow, and a boom could be heard as he was forced off the path. He glared back at Big Fatty Zhang and the others, eyes bloodshot and filled with murder. Bai Xiaochun. The person they hated the most wasn't Big Fatty Zhang, but rather Bai Xiaochun, who had come up with the despicable plan to begin with. The two outer sect disciples at the top of the mountain had been watching as the whole scene played out. They cleared their throats, and then backed up a bit, having nothing to say. Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He now stood at the finish line, sticking their chests out in pride and laughing heartily. "See you later, Chen Fei," said Big Fatty Zhang, slapping his stomach and causing the fat to jiggle. "Ha ha ha, although, not in the servants' district. Ha ha ha, I'll miss you. Congratulations on becoming an outer sect disciple." Chen Fei and his friends very nearly coughed up blood, and in their hearts, they wanted nothing more than to commit murder. Bai Xiaochun lifted his chin up, looking very pleased. "There's no need to thank us, elder brothers. Congratulations on becoming the fish which leapt over the dragon gate. As outer sect disciples, your meteoric success will be like the galloping divine steed. We junior brothers offer sincere congratulations." However, even as his words rang out, a cold harumph rang out from the top of Fragrant Cloud Peak. "There's no need for congratulations, you're coming too." Almost as soon as the words entered Bai Xiaochun's ears, he began to tremble. His eyes filled with fear as a powerful force surged down from further up the mountain, enveloped him, and then began to pull up the mountain. Bai Xiaochun let out a miserable shriek, and quickly latched his arms around a tree that bordered the trial by fire. "Elder brothers, save me," he screamed. This development occurred too quickly. Before Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He could even react, a cracking sound could be heard as the tree Bai Xiaochun was holding on to split in half. He flew backward like a kite with its string cut, spinning upward toward the top of the mountain. At the same time, a middle-aged man appeared up above, wearing a long blue cloak, looking very threatening despite not looking angry. It was none other than Li Qinghao. Chen Fei and his friends were always happy to gloat in the misfortune of others. As they watched what was happening to Bai Xiaochun, they couldn't help but feel as if the grand laws of heaven were truly being enforced implacably. As for the two outer sect disciples in charge of the trial by fire, they looked on with hatred, a sensation that no other servant had ever caused them to feel. "I don't want to go." Bai Xiaochun plopped onto the ground and immediately began to wail, his voice filled with such a feeling of being abused that any listener would surely weep. Simultaneously, back down on the path, Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He saw Li Qinghao and began to quiver. They quickly bowed their heads to avoid notice. Ninth junior brother, it's not that I refused to save you. Now that the Peak Lord of Fragrant Cloud Peak has shown up, you have no choice but to suck it up in the outer sect." Big Fatty Zhang heaved continuous sighs in his heart as he hunched his shoulders and tried to inconspicuously scuttle away. However, it was at that point that Li Qinghao's voice suddenly rang in his ears. "You two are coming along as well." As soon as Big Fatty Zhang heard the words, a powerful force dragged both him and Third Fatty He up into the air. They didn't even have a chance to grab onto a tree before they were hauled to the top of the mountain. "I don't want to go," Big Fatty Zhang wailed, sounding even more miserable than Bai Xiaochun. "I'd rather die in the ovens than climb the ladder in the outer sect." He sounded so miserable, in fact, that Bai Xiaochun looked up in surprise and forgot to cry. Third Fatty He didn't say anything, but instead looked silently down toward the bottom of the mountain, face a picture of depression and longing. When Li Qinghao heard Big Fatty Zhang's miserable wailing, his face darkened and he said, "Shut up." Instantly, Bai Xiaochun rose to his feet, face solemn as he stood there. Instead of looking sullen like he had before, he was the complete opposite, as if he had suddenly switched faces. Big Fatty Zhang stared in shock, and then immediately stood up. Inwardly, he felt as if the persecution he was enduring was like an ocean that threatened to overwhelm him. He just couldn't figure out why Li Qinghao wouldn't say anything when Bai Xiaochun wailed, and then yelled at him when he did the same thing. "Zhang Dehai, starting today, you'll be an outer sect disciple of Violet Cauldron Peak. 1. Chen Qingro, you'll be going to Green Crest Peak. 2. Bai Xiaochun, you'll be staying here with me, as an outer sect disciple of Fragrant Cloud Peak." Li Qinghao looked at Bai Xiaochun and felt a headache coming on. He had just gone into secluded meditation when he got the news about the oven's crew and everything that was going on. Even the sect elders were talking about it. Of course, from their perspective, the whole thing was quite amusing, and a nice break from the monotony of cultivation. None of them were even inclined to dole out any punishment. However, it wasn't something that could be allowed to go on indefinitely, so Li Qinghao came to straighten matters out. After he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeve, ignoring Chen Fei and the other two men as he looked at something further up on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Bai Xiaochun sighed bitterly and said his goodbyes to Big Fatty Zhang and Third Fatty He. All of a sudden, he remembered something. He turned his head to look at Third Fatty He, a strange expression on his face as he asked, "Third elder brother, your name is actually Chen Qingro?" "Ha ha ha, what a good name. It makes you sound like a smoking hot babe." Third Fatty He gave a cold but depressed snort, then turned and began to walk down the mountain. "What's wrong with him?" Bai Xiaochun asked, looking at Big Fatty Zhang. Big Fatty Zhang looked back at him with a strange look in his eyes. Then, he clapped him on the shoulder and spoke, his voice solemn and sincere. "Ninth junior brother, there's something I never told you before. Third Fatty He actually isn't your elder brother. In fact, she's your elder sister." Clearing his throat, he turned and hurried off. Bai Xiaochun stared at him blankly. It felt like thunder was crashing around inside his head, as if the whole world were collapsing. Elder sister? After a long moment passed, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and was about to turn and look at Third Fatty He, when suddenly Li Qinghao's cold voice rang out. "Quit running your mouth and catch up." Quote. Bai Xiaochun hurried after Li Qinghao, looking more bitter than ever. After a few paces, he turned, looked back down at the ovens, and sighed. It had been quite a while since Bai Xiaochun learned that the Spirit Stream sect's north bank had 4 mountain peaks, and that the south bank had 3. Li Qinghao was the peak lord of the third mountain, Fragrant Cloud Peak. The position of peak lord was very distinguished in the sect. Although Fragrant Cloud Peak didn't look very big, upon entering it, one would realize that it was filled with the singing of birds and the fragrant aroma of flowers. It looked like a celestial paradise, and was actually much larger on the inside than it appeared to be from the outside. Actually, the finish line of the trial by fire was only the peak of one of the auxiliary spurs of the mountain as a whole, and really only counted as the foot of the mountain. Mist swirled about everywhere, as well as an occasional medicinal aroma, a single whiff of which would lift the spirits and send a warm feeling through the body. Bai Xiaochun could immediately tell that this place was extraordinary. He took a deep breath, and his cultivation base, which hadn't made much progress in the past months, instantly surged to life. Li Qinghao didn't look back, but his eyes gleamed with a bit of admiration. Even he felt that Bai Xiaochun's progress in cultivation in the past year wasn't bad. "Now that you're an outer sect disciple, you can't go and cause any more trouble," Li Qinghao said slowly. "Practicing cultivation is like rowing a boat against the current. It requires constant effort." Bai Xiaochun didn't dare say anything back. He put on the most charming expression he could, and nodded continuously. "Sect resources are only one aspect of cultivation for outer sect disciples," Li Qinghao continued. "You also need to work hard and take advantage of whatever opportunities come your way. There are plenty of missions that you can take on for the sect. In a moment, you can go look at the missions and pick a few to start your training." When Bai Xiaochun heard that, his heart suddenly thumped. A while back when flipping through the sect rules, he had noticed one particular rule about outer sect disciple being required to accomplish at least one mission every so often. If they didn't, they would be punished by being demoted from outer sect disciple to servant. He immediately went wild with joy. However, Li Qinghao had apparently realized what he was thinking, and coolly said, "Don't go thinking about breaking the sect rules. Other people might be demoted to servant for not accomplishing missions, but if you try something like that, I'll expel you from the sect and return you to your village. 100 years from now I might even burn some incense for you, if I haven't forgotten about you by then." That frightened Bai Xiaochun half to death. If he had never seen this world of immortals, it wouldn't have been so bad. But now that he was on the way to living forever, he had no desire at all to go back to his village. If that happened, he might as well forget about trying to live forever. He quickly smacked himself in the chest and told himself that he would definitely go and accomplish some missions. Soon, they were in the middle section of Fragrant Cloud Peak. A building appeared out of the mists, not very large but very elegant looking. Visible through one of the windows was a young man, who sat there quietly reading a book. As if having sensed someone approaching, the young man looked up, revealing a handsome-looking face. When he saw Li Qinghao, he immediately walked out of the building and clasped hands in greeting. Disciple offers greetings, Peak Lord. This is disciple Bai Xiaochun. Take him and get him set up in the outer sect. Li Qinghao gave Bai Xiaochun a final look before transforming into a beam of prismatic light that shot further up the mountain. Now that Li Qinghao was gone, Bai Xiaochun could heave a sigh of relief. All of a sudden, he felt as if a weight had been lifted off of his shoulders, and the sky was now blue again. The young man measured Bai Xiaochun up, then laughed. Ah, are you the guy who's been blocking the trial by fire and selling spots? It's Bai Xiaochun, right? Bai Xiaochun chuckled. You're praising me for nothing, elder brother. A small thing like that isn't even worth mentioning. The young man laughed even harder at that. Clearly, he was very amused by Bai Xiaochun. Dropping the topic, he began to lead Bai Xiaochun around Fragrant Cloud Peak, pointing out some of the important buildings along the way. Fragrant Cloud Peak occupies an important position on the south bank. Green Crest Peak is known for its sword cultivators, Violet Cauldron Peak for their magical techniques. As for the Fragrant Cloud Peak, we excel in concocting spirit medicines. Fragrant Cloud Peak is famous even among the 4 great sects on this branch of the Heavenspan River. That's especially true of His Excellency the Peak Lord, who is one of the 2 most famous apothecaries in the Eastwood continent. Therefore, becoming an outer sect disciple of Fragrant Cloud Peak also makes you an apprentice apothecary. That means you need to study about plants and vegetation, as well as different medicine concocting techniques. The young man continued to provide even more detailed explanations to Bai Xiaochun as they walked along. Eventually, they reached the location where Bai Xiaochun received his outer sect disciple clothing and equipment, including a bag of holding. Although the bag of holding didn't fit much inside, Bai Xiaochun found the thing to be marvelous. After testing it out a few times, he put it away as carefully as if it were a precious treasure. What delighted him more than anything else was that getting promoted to outer sect disciple also came with a reward of 20 spirit stones. Now, he had just enough to buy the medicinal plants he needed. Soon it was dusk. Thanks to the explanations provided by the young man, Bai Xiaochun now knew a lot about Fragrant Cloud Peak. Eventually, the young man led him to a place called the 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. From there, he received a jade slip. This jade slip describes 10,000 types of plants and vegetation. You need to memorize all of them, and then you can get the second jade slip. Junior brother Bai, the path of cultivation is a long one, and spirit medicines are an aid that you can't do without. If you can become an apothecary, you'll be able to achieve a meteoric rise here. Apprentice apothecary, journeyman apothecary, master apothecary, the young man said with a smile. Junior brother Bai, your future progress will all depend on what good fortune you encounter. By the time night fell, the young man had led him to the courtyard dwelling the sect had arranged as his residence. Junior brother Bai, I have to head off the mountain tomorrow, so I won't be able to accompany you to the scripture pavilion. Go there at dawn to get the rest of the Violet Chi Cauldron Control Art mnemonics. You'll also be able to pick one more magical technique from the selection they have there. It's a good opportunity to get some things for free. After that, you'll have to pay merit points for any magical techniques you want. If there's anything you don't understand, you can always come looking for me. My name is Hou Yunfei. Many thanks for taking care of Xiaomei for me. Hou Yunfei smiled, clasped hands and bowed. Then he turned and walked away. Hou Yunfei? Bai Xiaochun returned the bow and watched Hou Yunfei walking off. After a moment of thought, he recalled the face of a young woman. Hou Xiaomei, he thought, blinking. He suddenly realized that he had struck it very lucky, as if he'd shoved a random stick into the ground only to have it grow into a lovely shady tree. After a moment, he took a deep breath and then looked over at his courtyard residence. His eyes gleamed, and he stood tall and straight beneath the moonlight. Well, I guess becoming an outer sect disciple isn't that bad after all. Flicking his sleeve, he walked into the courtyard. 1. Zhang Dahai's name in Chinese is Zhang Dahai. Zhang is a common surname. Dahai means ocean or literally, big sea. 2. Chen Qingru's name in Chinese is Xian Qingru. Chen is a common surname. Qingru means soft or gentle. This sounds like a very feminine name. Moonlight flooded down onto Fragrant Cloud Peak of the Spirit Stream sect, dispersing some of the mists that covered it, and causing the entire scene to be spectacularly beautiful. About halfway down the east face of the mountain, at the end of a side path, was a courtyard residence. The courtyard itself was as large as a field, and was filled with the delicate fragrance of flowers and plants. The residence itself was a log cabin, complete with a desk and a bed inside, all of which were made from some sort of magenta-colored wood that let off a lovely, fragrant aroma. This place was far superior to anything in the servants' district. The field in the courtyard had been cleared, and was ready for planting. There was even a well in one corner. Bai Xiaochun looked around at the moonlit scene, and his eyes sparkled with satisfaction. Outer sect disciples are official disciples of the Spirit Stream sect, so naturally they get much better compensation than the servants. This residence really isn't bad at all. Although, I remember eldest brother saying that inner sect disciples get to live in immortals' caves. I wonder what those are like. Bai Xiaochun looked up toward the top of Fragrant Cloud Peak. Only inner sect disciples qualified to live on the top half of the mountain. After a while, he went back into the log cabin, where he stretched lazily and then took out his bag of holding. After patting it carefully, a bottle of medicinal pills appeared in front of him, as well as a green stick of incense. Wow, this thing is awesome, he thought, rubbing the bag of holding fondly. After a moment, his eyes came to rest on the medicinal pill bottle and the green incense. The pill bottle had a label on it, upon which were written the words, Spirit Condensation. As for the incense, the words, Green Rising, were carved on the side. He had received similar things when he had become a servant. Consuming such pills would increase his cultivation base, and inhaling the smoke from the burning incense stick would have a similar effect. Using them as is would be a big waste. It would be much better to use spirit enhancement on them first. Maybe I could even use them to break through a bottleneck in my cultivation base. After pondering the matter for a bit, he made his decision. However, he only had one colored firewood on hand, so he decided to go down the mountain the following morning to get something better. Having made his decision, he sat down cross-legged and began to meditate. When it came to his cultivation, he had never given up. Although his progress had slowed recently, he still spent time every day on it. The whole purpose to practicing cultivation was to live forever, so of course he would stick to it. The night passed uneventfully, and soon it was dawn. Sunlight poked through the mist, making it seem as if valuable treasures were descending. Bai Xiaochun had been cultivating all night. He opened his eyes, donned his outer sect disciple clothing, and then hurried out of his log cabin to find the scripture pavilion that elder brother Hou had mentioned the day before. The scripture pavilion was some distance away from his own residence, on another side of the mountain. It took about an hour of walking before he saw a cluster of towering pagodas off in the distance. They radiated shimmering light and sent pulsing pressure out in all directions. He encountered quite a few other outer sect disciples, all of whom were hustling about busily. When they sensed that Bai Xiaochun was only at the third level of qi condensation, they completely ignored him. Bai Xiaochun didn't care, but considering that most of the disciples he encountered had cultivation bases far higher than his own, he proceeded cautiously. There were even a few he encountered whose cultivation bases were so high that they were unreadable. Those ones always had crowds of other disciples clustered around them, laughing and chatting with them as they walked along. The closer he got to the scripture pavilion, the more disciples he saw. Just as he was about to enter the area of the building itself, a beam of light flew down toward the area from one of the distant mountain peaks. Within that beam of light, it was possible to see a young man standing on a flying disc, who circled around Fragrant Cloud Peak before flying back off into the distance. That's Qian Daijin from the Hall of Justice. Elder Brother Qian. Elder Brother Qian is an inner sect disciple, and also a member of the Hall of Justice. He's famous. I heard that he's in the great circle of the 8th level of qi condensation, and has access to temporary flight items. I'm so jealous. Bai Xiaochun also looked over jealously. After Qian Daijin disappeared, he sighed inwardly. One of these days, when I can fly, I'm going to take time every day to fly in circles around Fragrant Cloud Peak. Muttering to himself in anticipation, he began to push his way through the crowd toward the scripture pavilion. The building was huge. The first floor was completely empty except for a long table. Behind the table, an old man sat there with his eyes closed in meditation. All the disciples who wanted to go past him would put their identity medallion onto the table. After it shone with glittering light, they would pass by respectfully. Copying everyone else, Bai Xiaochun placed his identity medallion onto the table. It only took a moment for it to glitter, after which he picked it back up and followed the other disciples up the stairs to the second floor. This floor was filled with numerous shelves, which were packed with jade slips or the occasional bamboo scroll. All of them shimmered with bright light, making the second floor of the scripture pavilion an extraordinary place. Seeing another staircase further off, Bai Xiaochun looked around and then walked over. However, when he tried to step onto it, his foot bounced back. A young man was sitting off to the side, with straight eyebrows and a bamboo scroll in his hand. When he sensed what was happening, he looked up at Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun put on his most charming expression and then curiously asked the young man, "Elder brother, what qualifications do you need to go up there?" "What, are you new here?" the young man replied slowly. "You have to be at the 5th level of qi condensation to go up there." With that, he continued to read the bamboo scroll. Bai Xiaochun could tell the young man didn't want to be disturbed. Forgetting about the 3rd floor, he began to stroll around the 2nd floor. Occasionally he would pick up a jade slip to examine, or look through some bamboo scrolls. He saw all sorts of different magical techniques, all of which seemed very exciting. That was especially true of something called the Flame Dao magical technique, which seemed especially exceptional. After a while, he found a jade slip for the Violet Qi Cauldron control art. It had descriptions and pictures for the 4th to 8th levels. He quickly grabbed it and then continued to stroll about. Time passed, and soon evening was approaching. Bai Xiaochun had browsed about 70% of the 2nd floor, and by now, the crowds were thinning. These 8 seem really incredible, he thought, looking over his selections. One was a bamboo scroll, somewhat dilapidated, but something that had caused Bai Xiaochun's eyes to widen with excitement the moment he saw it. Undying Live Forever Technique. He took a deep breath as he examined the introduction to the technique. Apparently, cultivating this technique to the ultimate degree would make a person undying and also be able to live forever. Panting, he once again examined the name of the technique, and then decided that this was his decision. He had begun practicing cultivation for the purpose of living forever, so finding a technique like this one almost made it seem like they were mysteriously connected by destiny. Laughing heartily, he held the bamboo scroll in his hand as he climbed down the stairs. Back in the main hall of the 1st floor, the old man was still sitting behind the table with his eyes closed, looking exactly like he had before. However, as soon as Bai Xiaochun put the Violet Qi Cauldron control art jade slip and the Undying Live Forever technique bamboo scroll onto the table, the man's eyes slowly opened. He looked Bai Xiaochun up and down, which left Bai Xiaochun trembling. The man's gaze felt like lightning. Shivering, Bai Xiaochun immediately put on his most respectful expression. Thankfully, the old man quickly looked down at Bai Xiaochun's identity medallion. Newly promoted disciples can take a copy of the first 8 levels of the Violet Qi Cauldron control art, the old man said slowly, his voice hoarse. They may also select a technique of their choosing. Then his eyes fell upon the Undying Live Forever technique bamboo scroll, and he frowned slightly. Although the name of this technique sounds astonishing, it's incomplete. Furthermore, the more you cultivate it, the more difficult it becomes. The pain is so excruciating that ordinary people can't endure it. Even most inner sect disciples can't cultivate it successfully. The majority give up. It's been here in the scripture pavilion for quite some time. Are you sure you want this particular magic? The old man looked at Bai Xiaochun. After hearing the old man's words, Bai Xiaochun got the feeling that this technique had been waiting here for years just for him. Then he thought again about the words, undying, and live forever, and his blood felt like it was boiling. He immediately responded, "Senior, I definitely want it, very much." The old man said nothing further to dissuade him. He waved his right hand, sending 2 blank jade slips flying out. After the copies were made, he handed them to Bai Xiaochun, then paid him no more heed and went back to meditating. Bai Xiaochun put the jade slips away. Eyes gleaming with anticipation, he left the scripture pavilion and headed back to his courtyard residence. By the time he got back, it was already nighttime. Once again inside his log cabin, he sat down cross-legged, took a deep breath, and pulled out the jade slip for the Undying Live Forever technique. Then he circulated his spiritual energy and sent it into the jade slip. After closing his eyes, the technique's magical incantation appeared in his mind. An hour later, he opened his eyes again, and a thoughtful expression could be seen. Just as the old man had said, the Undying Live Forever technique was incomplete. According to the description, the technique was cultivated in 2 ways, internally and externally. It was further broken down into the external aspects of skin, flesh, and muscle. The internal aspects were bones and blood. As for this incomplete version, it only contained the technique for cultivating skin. Also, the cultivation method truly did seem to be a torment. Furthermore, to cultivate it required a huge expenditure of resources. However, there were several secret magics listed inside that seemed almost beyond belief. For example, there was one called the throat-crushing grasp that was supposedly unbeatable. Bai Xiaochun hesitated for a moment, then looked once more at the words, undying, and live forever. Finally, his eyes filled with determination, and he followed the description in the information, using both of his hands to strike various positions on his body. Bai Xiaochun was focused on not dying and living forever in a way that vastly outmatched other people. Therefore, he did exactly as the technique required, and beat himself the entire night. The following day, his whole body hurt. It didn't matter whether he stood up or sat down. Even lifting his arm hurt. And yet, he gritted his teeth and continued to do as the technique manual instructed, and forced himself to move. OWWWWWWW. Relax then flex. AAAAOOOWWWW. Flex then relax, he said, repeating one of the lines from the technique as he hopped and skipped around the courtyard. He let out one miserable shriek after another, and tears were streaming down his face. Finally, he gritted his teeth, grabbed some spirit stones, and headed down the mountain. He figured that if he had to move around, he might as well just go out and buy the medicinal plants he needed to get the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill. That would be a lot better than doing nothing more than exercising in his courtyard. Soon, numerous outer sect disciples on Fragrant Cloud Peak saw a very strange sight. There was a fair-faced young man hopping and skipping about in a very strange fashion. He was also crying out at the top of his lungs in a fashion which almost sounded euphoric. Ah, oh oh, ah, oh oh, ah, 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 ah. Bai Xiaochun didn't want to cry out, but the pain was just too much. In fact, it hurt so much that he was pretty sure that even not moving would also hurt. However, all he had to do was think about the words, undying, and live forever, and he continued with vicious determination. And thus he continued all the way down to the market outside of the sect. Trembling, he bought all of the medicinal plants he needed, as well as some one-colored firewood. The two-colored firewood was much more expensive, so he only bought one piece. After that, he ran out of spirit stones. Gritting his teeth, he went back to the mission's office and handed in the mission he had taken when he was still a servant. In return, he got the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill. The pill was yellow, about as big as his thumbnail, and emanated a strange medicinal aroma. He looked at the pill, his body still burning with so much pain that he could barely talk. Sweat poured down him, soaking him completely. Clenching his teeth, he climbed back up the steps of Fragrant Cloud Peak, leaving a trail of sweat behind him as he went. He got quite a few surprised and even cynical glances from other outer sect disciples. After all, he was really sweating far beyond what was normal. He really wasn't sure what was going on. By the time he got back to his courtyard residence, it was the middle of the night. As soon as he walked inside, he collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. Despite having passed out, the pain woke him up several times through the night. By the time the light of dawn spread out across the sky, though, he woke up and realized that the pain was gone. An incomplete minor cycle, he thought, recalling the technique's introduction. If he could go for a full day and night without passing out, that would be a complete minor cycle. If he could complete 81 minor cycles, that would count as a minor circulation. After that, his skin would be changed, and would reach a point that the process wouldn't be so painful. If the technique were simple, everyone would do it, and then everyone would be able to live forever. The harder it is, the more I'm going to cultivate it. Then I'll really be undying and able to live forever. His eyes filled with determination, his obsession with living forever was strong, and had reached a truly astonishing level. Now that his body didn't hurt anymore, he pulled out the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill and studied it. He was just about to eat it when all of a sudden he seemed to recall something. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, he hurried into his log cabin and performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, causing the turtle walk to appear. To consume it the way it is would be a big loss. The best thing to do is eat it after doing a spirit enhancement. Licking his lips, he produced the two-colored flame firewood and kindled it beneath the turtle walk. Immediately, the log burst into flames, and moments later, became ash. At the same time, two glowing designs appeared on the turtle walk. After a moment of hesitation, he placed the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill inside. Almost as soon as the spirit medicine entered the wok, silver light flashed. Having experienced this before, Bai Xiaochun's expression didn't change in the least, and he continued to stare at the wok. After a moment, the silver light faded away and, shockingly, 2 silver designs could be seen on the age-prolonging longevity-enhancing pill. The medicinal aroma which floated off of it was now much stronger than it had been before, so strong that a mere sniff would enliven the spirits. It's too bad I don't have anything to make a 3-colored flame. He picked up the spirit medicine and put it into his mouth. The instant it melted, it transformed into a scalding current that swept through his body. Bai Xiaochun felt his mind rumbling, and his body felt like a furnace. However, even as he was consumed by heat, the white hair on his head turned black again. A powerful surge of life force replenished him, and after a moment, he could tell that it was even stronger than before. A bit of blood oozed out of his nose. Major success, he thought, his eyes widening. He immediately began to cultivate the violet chi cauldron control art, but found that there was little difference. After all, this spirit medicine replenished vital energy, not spiritual energy. More blood flowed out of his nose, and the scalding current inside of him expanded. He felt like he was an inflatable ball that was on the verge of popping. Astonishment filled him. Actually, the result of performing a 2-fold enhancement on the spirit medicine ensured that the result vastly exceeded anything from before, and was far more valuable. Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base, which was at the 3rd level of qi condensation, simply couldn't take it. At this critical juncture, he suddenly thought of the undying live forever technique. He immediately leapt up and began hitting himself as hard as possible. Popping sounds rang out, and the scalding current began to clear up. Bai Xiaochun didn't dare to stop. It wasn't until an hour later that the current faded away completely. He was in so much pain that he fell down onto the ground, panting for air. However, he looked more excited than ever, and his eyes shone with an intense gleam. It has something to do with the spirit enhancement, but the main thing was that spirit medicine. Spirit medicine is remarkable. It can increase spiritual energy and can increase longevity. Well, I wonder if there's a type of medicine that can make people live forever. The more he thought about it, the more excited he got, and the brighter his eyes shone. Fragrant Cloud Peak trains apothecaries. Well then, I'm going to become an apothecary. I'm going to make alive forever never die pill. Bai Xiaochun began to pant, and his intrigue for spirit medicine reached an unheard of level. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.